Good morning, everyone. Sorry for the delay in getting on air this morning. Welcome and thank you for joining today's Surge Series webcast. I'm Claire Butterfield. I'm the Program Director at the Illinois Science and Energy Innovation Foundation, or ISEIF. And joining us today are Doug Mackenzie Moore, who's the President of Mackenzie Moore Associates and one of the pioneers of community-based social marketing, and Anna Markowski, Community Projects Manager at Elevate Energy. As a member of ISEIF's inaugural class of grantees, Elevate has been reaching Illinois residents of all backgrounds across the state to teach them about smart grid. If you are joining us on YouTube and you'd like to submit questions to this, just click on the box in the lower left-hand corner that says Be Part of the Conversation, and you'll go straight over to the Hangout page. Once you're at the Hangout page, you can click on the little white grid in the upper right corner of the screen and switch from Showcase to the Q&A app, and we'll leave about 10 minutes at the end for questions. Today we are discussing the question, what if they don't listen? As we've discussed in previous events, the home energy sector is in the middle of a major shift enabled by smart grid technology, but energy is not very high on the average residential consumer's list of priorities. So how do we tell them what they need to know in ways that promote action at scale? Doug and Anna, thank you so much for joining us today. Whether it's climate change generally or energy specifically, each of you is working to empower people to take action on issues that are perceived to be invisible and remote. It's challenging work. In broad strokes, what is your approach for engaging audiences on these issues, and what makes it effective?
Anna, why don't you go first?
Sure. As an organization, our main goal is smarter energy use for all. So we're trying to target all communities, give people the knowledge that they can use so that they can be smart about their energy use and live more efficient, affordable lifestyles. In terms of our organizing, I follow the model, I call it REI, respect, empower, include. We're going out into the community, we're trying to respect where people come from, the differences in their knowledge, and make sure that we are including them in these changes so that they're empowered to make smart choices.
How about you, Doug?
Yeah. The approach that I've been advocating, something called community-based social marketing, is based upon knowledge that if we simply provide people with information clear, the likelihood that they'll actually change their behavior is remote. We have a pretty good body of knowledge in the field of environmental psychology demonstrating that over decades. And so community-based social marketing instead really focuses on, first of all, trying to understand which behaviors are most worthwhile for us to pursue. Once we have some sense of what energy efficiency actions we'd most want people to be involved in, the secondary question we're asking is, what are the barriers and what are the motivations, and how do those barriers and motivations differ for different segmented audiences? And then we need to really craft strategies that address those different barriers and benefits for different segmented audiences. We need to pilot test those strategies, and then finally we need to go from pilot tests on to broad scale implementation. And the reason, again, why all of that's important is the behaviors differ in terms of the importance, and we know really clearly that the barriers and to a lesser extent the motivations differ for different energy efficiency actions that we like to engage people in, and they differ against different segmented audiences.
So what are some of the barriers that you're seeing?
Well, I want to suggest in some ways that's the wrong question to ask. The barriers are so unique and so specific to different energy efficiency behaviors that we need to ask at the level of a discrete action. What are the barriers to people installing programmable thermostat and programming it? What are the barriers to the person taking out their existing shower head and putting a new shower head in? And what are the barriers to someone testing the temperature for the hot water heater and then resetting the temperature on the hot water heater? Each of those are discrete actions, and each of them often have different barriers associated with them. So we need to understand what those barriers are at the discrete level, rather than thinking about what are the barriers broadly across behaviors related to energy efficiency. And that's been, I think, one of the real problems with work in this area, is we've assumed a broad array of barriers exist to energy efficiency, and we're often not asking the right question, which is what are the barriers to very specific actions, and then how do we then develop programs to try to address those. We see less variability, Claire, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, on the benefit side, but we see a lot of specificity on the barrier side, and we need to really clearly understand what those barriers are.
Anna, does that jive with your experience in the field too?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, in Illinois, in terms of barriers that we've seen, it runs a gauntlet. We're looking at, when we're talking about smart grid in general, is that enough to get people motivated? What's the incentive for them? So we've looked at ways to try to pair that with energy efficiency overall, which people maybe are a little bit more familiar with, but still there are challenges there. Is that really, the most pressing issue for that community, especially communities that aren't going to be hit by the general massing? So how can we specifically target? And like Doug mentioned, being able to be in the community on the ground allows us to develop really specific messages for each community and for each person so we can really be effective. And that's something that only through person to contact are you able to achieve.
So just to shift the conversation a little bit, if I understand it correctly, community-based social marketing relies on shifting the norms of a community in support of some more sustainable behavior. So how does a member of a typical community even know what the norms are as they relate to something as abstract or obscure as energy use?
Yeah. Claire, norms are just one of many different behavior change tools we might utilize, and you can think of norms as being a motivational technique, along with commitments, along with incentives, etc. But we really want to make sure that the approaches that we're using are customized to specific behaviors that we're focusing on. So we don't want to be thinking about utilizing norms. We don't even want to be honestly be thinking about using smart meters, etc., unless the particular thing that we're imagining and utilizing somehow better allows us to address barriers and benefits to specific behavioral change. One of the things that concerns people who work in my field is that we're often utilizing approaches without asking for what. And we need to be stepping back and saying, how does this approach allow us to address the barriers and benefits better than something else we might utilize? What we've seen broadly across utilities is that they're utilizing approaches without asking that question first. And it's not to suggest that smart meters, etc., may not be worthwhile, but to imagine that they are a panacea that we can use across approaches is wrong. We need to be stepping back and asking, what are, again, the barriers to someone installing a high-efficiency shower head? How does a smart meter address those? As Anna said, that can facilitate motivation, but it doesn't make it any easier for the person to get to the hardware store. The person doesn't know how to take out their existing shower head and put a new one in, how to wrap it with plumber's tape, accept the threads. Well, we're not addressing the barriers to that specific behavior change well. All we may be doing is motivating them more to engage in the action, but we're not addressing the core barriers to that specific behavior. So again, anything that we be thinking about in terms of tools that we might be building into our programs really need to be based upon that fundamental question. What are the barriers? What are the motivations for this specific action? And when we look at energy efficiency, we've got over 240 different discrete behaviors we might ask people to be involved in. We need to ask, first of all, which of those behaviors make sense for us to go after. And that's really the first step of community-based social marketing, to try to work out which of those behaviors make the most sense for us to be addressing.
And I think, going off of that really energy efficiency hasn't become the thing to do or what's really important. If you think about, a mom or a dad who has to pick up the kids and go to an after-school activity, and maybe, if they're lucky, go to their book club, cook dinner, all of those things that are in their lives, energy efficiency doesn't rise to the level of something that is important right now for your average audience. Then when you look at communities that are more quote-unquote hard to reach, folks of a lower income level who speak a different language, seniors, rural people, how are we going to get to them, and how do we put this above those issues of day-to-day? How do I make it through? How does energy efficiency rise to the level where it's important enough for them to pay attention to? And so for us, a lot of it is incorporating energy efficiency into things like affordability so that it is understood as a way to be able to stay in your home. But again, as Doug said, right now, how does the smart meter, how does the smart grid really hook in with that? When we talk about in-home devices, right now there's a huge financial barrier there. So those are all things we're going to have to look at on how to address that in order to make this really relevant for your, average user and the people who really need the help from this technology the most and will actually benefit from it.
Mm-hmm. So are there examples from other areas, such as public health, where this kind of approach, this community-based social marketing or peer-to-peer approach, has worked well that show us that it should be equally applicable in the energy area?
Yeah, I'd say, first of all, Claire, there's a number of examples from the energy area, but speaking to other topic areas, we've seen people, for example, really dramatically alter the number of people who are idling their vehicle engines. And they step through the process of identifying which behaviors to focus on, did the bear and benefit research, and then developed strategies that really remarkably altered the number of people idling their vehicles in a number of Canadian cities. We've seen this apply to a really broad array of behavioral changes with often very good success. And a lot of that success comes from really intimately understanding, as Anna was suggesting, what are the barriers for a very specific segmented audience and what might motivate them. And Anna, in your case, you're saying, for low-income audiences, it's, in Canada, it's making a choice between, am I able to feed my family, or am I able to heat my home in the wintertime? What in the UK people call fuel poverty. And if we understand that that's a principal motivation, then we want to be able to speak to that motivation and be thinking about at the same time, how do we really try to effectively address the barriers to the actions that that household might be interested in?
So what are the markers that tell you that this is working? So if we were going to just stick with the public health analogy, we would be seeing disease reduction, and we would know that something was happening on the ground. But in the case of the behaviors you're trying to influence, they can be very difficult to trace through the community. How do you see progress?
There's a couple different ways in which we can measure success in the particular case of energy use. The first, of course, is to be looking at reductions in energy use that we're measuring in aggregate at the level of a specific household. If that's all we're doing, we won't be able to know, Claire, what specific behaviors the household might be engaged in. But there are data loggers that have now been developed. There's a woman, for example, at Stanford, who's written algorithms that allow us to be able to take the information that comes from a specially designed smart meter and disaggregate it and be able to determine, are we seeing people reducing their air conditioning usage? Are we seeing them washing their clothes, etc., and doing that at off-peak times? There's a number of ways in which we can now sort of peer into the house. We can do the same thing with businesses as well, and look at their overall energy use, which is an indicator of whether we reduce that or not, but then look at the very specific actions that the household might be engaged in. We can now pick up at a very fine level the detail, the specific behaviors that people may be involved in, and related to, again, things like air conditioning, shower time, a variety of other behaviors that, again, each have their own sort of digital fingerprint that go along with them. So we've gotten a lot better, and just in the last few years, basically beginning to collect that kind of information. And interestingly, we have those kinds of data loggers, not just for energy now, but we have them for water as well, where people are taking digital fingerprints, basically, and disaggregating information.
And how do you know that how do you see things moving through the community? What is your tracing factor?
Sure. So ours is a lot of on-the-ground work. It's difficult. Right now, being able to, I think we'd be better able to do this if we're coordinating more closely with the utilities. I think being able to really find out if people enroll in given programs. Similarly, in terms of overall reduction of energy use in a home, we will track that and calculate that for people who enroll through a program and get their permission to do so. But in terms of from the point they meet us to the point they actually follow through with a program, it can be very difficult. We do a lot of follow-up with folks through phone calls, meetings. We try to be a bit of a pest, but not too much to turn people off. But you have to be a little bit of one. It's continuing to pester people and talk to them about what's going on, putting it back up to the top of the list. I'd say, again, this isn't a top priority for most people, and even when it is and can really help them, they don't view it as such. So it's moving it back up to that pile for them and reminding them that it's something that you do want to do, and here we can help you along the way, trying to eliminate some of those barriers and help people enroll in the process. But that's very difficult with people along the way. But I think that's at this point in time, especially in the Chicago area where we're working, there's a difference in interest than there are in other parts of the country, or I'm sure the same as in Canada, in different parts of the country that things function differently, that there's a different level of energy behind efficiency and understanding behind it. So some of it's getting that understanding there so more people will follow through. But at the moment, with the lack of understanding and immediate interest and a lot of energy efficiency stuff, if we're talking about regular Joe, it requires a lot of intensive follow-up. We use databases so that we make sure that that follow-up is extremely personal, and we're tracking, every single call, every interaction with a person, and making sure that next time we know that, your son isn't able to swim right now, and because he broke his arm, and is he back in the pool yet? So that we have that more personal conversation. So we're not coming off as salespeople who have that immediate turnoff to a lot of our residents. And tracking that conversation so that we can have really productive, successful, personal conversations with people to help them make, smart decisions.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us a story or two that tells you that it's working?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think as we go out in the community and we're trying to work with, I'm trying to think of a specific example for you. We're worked with some seniors who, they're struggling through bankruptcy and about to lose their home. So we try to figure out solutions with them to get, is there a way that we can get them money so they can do retrofit on their home, so they can save money every month there on their bills? Are there programs in terms of electricity programs, pricing programs that might be better for them? We've worked with folks to review, then, we'll take a look at your bill and see, are you being gouged? A lot of people have signed up for different electricity pricing programs on a nice introductory rate, and now the rates spiked up. So being able to have that personal conversation, get in the door, they start to feel comfortable with us, we can start to have that more personal analysis, and then follow them all the way through to the end. We typically find out, and this again speaks to coordination and being able to really get this information, which is why it's so important that this information is available, not far and wide to everybody, but to specific programs. That there is difficulty figuring out if someone enrolled, and then what effect has that taken.
Mm-hmm. So, Doug, have you seen a breakthrough or two in the energy field that helps you to see that this approach is effective?
I think there's several, but one of the ones I would mention that is probably clear at the largest scale is a program that was delivered in Queensland in Australia, where they followed much but not all of the process. They started off with first working out which behaviors to focus on. This is part of a program called Climate Smart, and they first identified which of those 240 behaviors made the most sense to focus on, and then did some bearing benefit research, not as extensively as I would have liked, but they did bearing benefit research. And then they literally delivered a program that involved retrofitting over 300,000 households across the state. So we're seeing people begin to utilize these approaches on a broad scale. I think the more interesting question is sort of how do you do that in a way that's sort of cost effective? And and part of what you mentioned before, Claire, is this idea of potentially using norms, potentially using social diffusion, so that we don't necessarily have to speak to every person. What Anna's doing, we know works in terms of this sort of face-to-face communication, where you're able to personalize the contact that you have and be able to speak to the specific barriers and motivations that a household might have for different behaviors we'd like them to be involved in. But are there ways in which we can then move from that to having people talking to one another within the community itself? And I think one of the more interesting ways that we can do that is to begin to make energy use in our communities more visible. And so one of the ways that we can do that, for example, is to have stickers go on the side of someone's recycling container that showcases that this is a household that's engaged in very specific actions. We know very clearly that the less visible a behavior is, the less likely that behavior is to become normative within a community, and the less likely it is that people are to talk about this particular action. So one of the things we want to be thinking about is what elements of our programs might we utilize that actually enhance the likelihood that we get those conversations happening in order that people are talking with their neighbors or talking with their friends around the specific behaviors that they've already engaged in or might consider engaging in. That then brings social diffusion and brings social norms basically into the program itself.
And I think just going off that, I think for us, some specific examples of where we've seen that work in terms of general energy efficiency that we're trying to bring now to the smart grid and electric education, which is a little bit more difficult because it's so far less visual. In a community called Oak Park here in the Chicago metro area, we saw a huge amount of success with doing meetings in people's homes and being out at community meetings. And it turned out that we had, twice as many people when we were really on a roll enrolling in the program who we had never heard of, and we had no way of tracking back where they came from. We had no commercials going on or anything like that. People were getting interested in the program and deciding to enroll in it and take advantage. And we kind of call that, what ends up happening is there's this, Prius effect, which is you see it in the driveway, and so you want to have that and be cool too. We'd see the same thing in this community of Oak Park, where you'd see the insulation truck in someone's driveway, doing air sealing and insulation, and then the next week it's down the block another couple houses and another couple houses and another couple houses, really neighbor to neighbor taking off versus having to have that, paid staff doing that. And similarly we have volunteers who are out right now who we've trained, kind of the train the trainers model, who we've trained, who are out in the community, able to deliver the same type of messages, able to understand the basics of community organizing, so that ideally we can leave that community and something is left behind that keeps going without us. And initially maybe it's around efficiency, and then smart grid, and whatever else is the next to that community. And maybe it has nothing to do with efficiency, but empowering people to have those tools, they can then decide how to use that. I'd also say, in terms of getting in there in a community and really having this Prius effect work requires being really concentrated on a smaller sets of the community. I always tell my organizers it's really about having, get the first plate spinning and then add the second. When we've been in a community and we're intentionally in one community instead of in 10 all at the same time, we are much more successful. All of a sudden, it's like City Hall wants to erect a statue to that organizer. They're at every single City Hall meeting, they're at Town Hall meeting, they're at all of the community meetings, and all of a sudden people start thinking, how can we develop the next project so it includes that organizer? How can we develop our programs and policy so that it will benefit them because we like them, because we have a personal relationship with them? And so you get that going, you get the volunteers going, and then you can move on to the next community. It's still a very costly, model, which is why that Prius effect is really important. But that's kind of how you are able to, I think, big picture move out of this. In electricity, again, that's harder because you get your smart meter and it's not, there's no big parade. There's nothing out there for a long time. They do it in, 15 minutes. With a lot of the electricity programs, there's nothing visual going on, which is why those in-home devices, those shiny object parts of it, are going to be really important in terms of making that kind of that cool factor, that Prius effect really happen, so people want to follow along.
I'd suggest, Anna, related to that, though, something like a meter that's happening inside someone's home, that has visibility for people who visit the home. It has visibility for members of the household itself, but it has no outward visibility to the larger community. And we really want to be thinking about, what do we know from the social science literature about how to make use of public and durable commitments that showcase that that particular household's involved in that action. We have some behaviors that by their very nature, such as, for example, the installation of photovoltaics or solar hot water, that have visibility in the community. Curbside recycling obviously has visibility in the community, but we need to be asking, in the case of energy efficiency, how do we make the behaviors that households engaged in that don't have that physical nature to them visible nonetheless for others in the community? And in my mind, that usually means some type of sticker going onto someone's recycling container, something being screened on the front curb in front of the person's home, etc., that gains visibility to that particular behavior. If we don't do that, Clara, then I think it's a lot more difficult for us to actually get people to quickly begin to be talking about these behavioral changes and to begin to get social diffusion, social norms happening in the community. Of course, that's not all we need to do, but we need to be thinking about how we leverage those in order to be able to reduce the cost of delivering our programs.
That's a really interesting point, and Anna, it reminds me of a garden program that I was familiar with in my previous incarnation, where they, as much as putting in the native plants, they put a little sign on people's homes that said they were part of this program, and that sign really seemed to be the thing that explained to the neighbors what was going on. The plants didn't do it because people didn't know what they were, but people really wanted that sign. And I wonder if you've done any experiments with the little window decal that says this home is a smart home, or have you thought about that?
Yeah, I've thought and written about that extensively. And for those of you who are on the call, listening into the call, you can go onto our website, which is simply cvsm.com, and there's a free version of my book available there. There's a whole chapter in that book on the utilization of commitments. We know, Claire, for commitments to be really effective, they need to have two elements to them. The first is that they need to be public. So yes, we can put a sticker in someone's front window of their home, but that has only a visibility for the people who are directly in front of that house, looking at the house. Things are happening directly in front of the house, so out of the curb, and that's why recycling containers, things that are posted in front of the house somehow, really have much greater visibility. We want to be looking for those opportunities to make use of commitments that are both public as well as durable. We really need those two different types of program elements, and we're seeing large numbers of programs now where people are beginning to utilize those kinds of details in order to be able to build social diffusion and build social norms as well.
And I think, in terms of some concrete examples we've used in the past, we have and currently use for Illinois Home Performance with Energy Star. Folks get a certificate if they reach a 15% reduction in their home, and then they get one of those, they get not only a certificate for themselves, but also a little window cling that they can put in their house, basically saying this is a certified Energy Star home. Which people are excited about. But like Doug said, that's only visible for some people, and it's not taking over the whole window. And so we've experimented in the past with some of our meetings that we've had as the event is going on. We usually incorporate energy efficiency with the smart meter and smart grid education. So we have a blower door running in someone's home that's making a good amount of noise in the neighborhood for a few minutes, and a sign out on the front lawn saying look at this efficiency meeting happening at at this house. That's not a permanent thing. We've struggled with people permanently wanting to do something like a yard sign out on their lawn unless they're a real greenie. But things like that, certainly people making those public declarations will have a big effect. But again, in terms of how do you make that work for the electricity side, that's definitely a question, and I don't think it's something that we've quite figured out yet. And again, part of it is there's not even in the green community the excitement about that that there is about a lot of other efficiency measures. So how do you tie that in with the more general updates or general efficiency? So, or do you not? I don't know the answer to that, but certainly it hasn't taken off on its own.
Claire, maybe I could expand on that a little bit. We have had very good success, Anna, in actually getting people to fix stickers onto their curbside containers, but we quite literally don't ask them to do it themselves. We show them the stickers. We ask them to get their container out to the curbside on the next recycling collection date. And if we do that, we double to triple the number of stickers that actually show up. If you ask someone instead to put the sticker on themselves, the likelihood that they will do that is relatively remote. We know also, Claire, that the sticker needs to speak to a specific behavioral change. So it can't say, for example, this is an energy efficient home, because it doesn't speak to the specific actions that the household's engaged in. We need to literally be talking about the fact that the person's installed high-efficiency shower heads, programmable thermostats. We need to speak to the specific behaviors, because if we're doing that, then we're enhancing the likelihood that other people will be talking to that person about, oh, you installed a programmable thermostat. Where did you get that? How's it working for you? We need that level of specificity for this to work well for us. So, for those, again, who are listening to this, two things I would really recommend. You want public and durable commitments, but we want them out at the curbside where they can be seen. And we've had much better success with simply saying to someone, here's the sticker, we'd like to ask for your permission to put this on. And if you would just get your container out to the curbside, we'll put it on the next collection date. That allows us to get the stickers on the right side of the container itself. If you think about people traveling down the street, you want them all on one side of the container for one side of the street. You want them on the other side of the container for the other side of the street. We want to maximize basically visibility of the kinds of actions that Anna's organization is involved in. And speaking to what Anna was mentioning as well, we want to literally do that on a street-by-street basis. If you do this broadly across the community, we're not developing social norms, we're not as likely to facilitate social diffusion than if we literally target a street at a time and have these types of conversations and begin to showcase for other people in that particular neighborhood that these are people that are involved in these actions. Now, some people will say, and this is a response to one of the questions from Peter Nicholson, some people will say, well, that's really labor intensive. And I want to suggest that that's really not the right question to ask. The question I think we should be asking is what's most cost effectively bringing about a behavioral change for us. We have really good evidence that ad-based campaigns, in which people are spending often millions of dollars to encourage energy efficiency, rarely bring about behavioral changes. So how can that be cost effective? You might get reach, but we're not getting actual changes in people's energy use. So the kinds of approaches that Anna and I are advocating are more labor intensive, but they're far more likely to work well in actually getting people to change their behavior. So if we evaluate our programs making use of return on investment calculations, we're in a much better place to know that this is a program that's actually working well for us.
And I think part of the issue there is a part of that lack of communication that I was talking about, from maybe utilities or regulators down to the people doing the work. Now, there are all sorts of studies that time and time again, like Doug said, have shown that community-based marketing is really far more effective. But people continue to do broad-based marketing, sending leaflets to people's doors. For a long time in the past, I worked in politics, and we had a real knowledge of, we called it touches, but that was how many times I have to talk to you, and there were different qualities that each of those took on. We knew, as we're going out and talking to people in the community, how many conversations and what quality does that conversation need to be in order to move you forward to change a behavior. And we knew how many behaviors we really could reasonably change in a given period of time. I don't think we have that completely figured out as much as we need to for energy efficiency. And that maybe is part of our barrier there, because the quality of touch that you're getting from a mailer, a door hanger, fine, but a mailer that takes, on average, if you're lucky, 10 seconds to find its way in the trash, it's going to be different than that person talking to you. So once we have that, I think the science of that, and maybe Doug, maybe have information on that, the science of that figured out, that'll be much more helpful in terms of making the case for how we get people, how community-based marketing is really actually much more cost-effective, even though it doesn't appear like it initially on the face of things.
There's an emerging literature around what's called decision fatigue that suggests that no more than 5 to 6 behaviors at a time. And that's not to suggest that 5 or 6 actions is optimal, but this emerging literature is beginning to suggest that if you ask people to do more than 5 to 6 things, they tend to do less rather than more. And that really suggests, Claire, that when we're thinking about which behaviors to focus on, we really want to be asking ourselves, well, which behaviors have the highest impact, highest probability of people adopting them, and right now have the lowest levels of penetration? And interestingly, in many cases, utilities don't have that information. And how are we making then informed decisions around which actions to go after? In my book, we talk about sort of these tier 1 behaviors, which would be those behaviors that, again, have highest impact, highest probability of adoption, and lowest penetration rates. And again, Anna, the work that you're doing, we would see very different levels of adoption, different actions across different segmented audiences because they have different barriers. So we need to work those things out first, understand what the barriers and motivations are, and then begin to really create well-crafted strategies that make it easy for someone to do the installation of a programmable thermostat, to put in a high-efficiency shower head, etc. It doesn't surprise me in many ways that many of our programs right now, I'm not speaking about your programs, Anna, but I'm saying that many of the broad-based advertising campaigns are not working well because they're not fundamentally addressing the barriers that exist to the specific actions that we're asking people to engage in. And we're wasting literally millions and millions of dollars. If you look at programs like Fletcher Power in California, the Opinion Dynamics recently did a study of it showing that there was very little evidence that people were changing their behavior based upon what was millions of dollars being spent on running advertisements. We just need to get a lot smarter, basically, about designing and delivering these kinds of programs.
Anna, I'm afraid that all of this makes me want you guys to try putting a sticker out that says, I did the 5 things, and we know what the 5 things are, and those are the ones we want to do, and we've drawn down the barriers so that you can afford the programmable thermostat, and we can find somebody who will install them free in low-income seniors' homes or something.
Yeah.
So it's coming. You're warned now. But yeah, I really like that. And I did see some research by an organization that suggested that if you ask people to do too few things, in the energy sector that can also backfire because they don't see the results. Then they expend it. They spent the chip they had for energy, and their bill didn't go down, and so that can be frustrating too. And I think you have some experience with that as well.
Yeah, we have a major concern with a lot of the direct install programs, or even the current way that some of we have these peak time rebate programs that are coming out for people, which a lot of people think of these things as introductory energy efficiency drugs, and I hope that's the case. But if someone's not super excited about energy efficiency, is saving, let's say max $12 a year, but most likely, $5 a year, is that going to really be enough to pull them in? And are they going to sign up for it if they have to go home and get their account number and go through a whole rigmarole? Are they going to decide maybe that's not worth it, even if they're low income? And so does that not entice people to it? I know there's a pilot that's going to be going on to kind of test in Illinois. Is that really an introductory drug for people to get them into the energy efficiency world? Similarly, if we're asking somebody, we call it the I did good box that people check. And so we're always afraid and very conscious of, when we're talking to people who aren't used to taking energy efficiency action, that if we get them to check just the lowest hanging fruit, they're not going to go to something that they might have jumped to that would have them take larger steps to become even more efficient. Similarly, if we're only really presenting them one option at a time, versus giving them a package that really looks at the whole home and how they live as a whole, they're going to probably only do that one option, and then they're done. They're done. I did good box is checked and whatever else. So we're working on how do you combine all of these disparate programs on efficiency that aren't necessarily linked on the back end right now, in terms of funding sources. How do you make that a holistic package for somebody so that when they're addressing efficiency, they're addressing everything that they really can all at once, but it doesn't seem like it's 10 different steps.
And then they get the sticker.
And then they get the sticker, right.
Now I'm excited about stickers.
Yeah, interesting, Claire. They should get the sticker beforehand. And the reason for that is when people make public and durable commitments to engage in actions,
Absolutely.
it dramatically increases the likelihood they'll engage in behavior. So that we want to be utilizing commitments up front rather than after the fact. I know you meant it as a joke.
I think that's totally true. We talked about this with little exit tickets and things as people leave a meeting when they state that they intend to do something. If you followed up with me via email 2 weeks later to say, did you do it? I will go do it, and then I will answer the email because I made the commitment, and I don't want to see you again until I've honored the commitment that I made.
And there's a difference between a checkbox and a signature. All of those things are different, and sometimes I think we try to make things too simple with those commitments. Have been studies that have shown that when it is a signature versus just a checkbox, if you do have to fill out your address and your phone number, you will have. Now, granted, you maybe are deterring some people who don't want to give you that information, but you will have a higher commitment rate from those people because if it's just that tiny little bit more labor intensive, it's going to follow through.
Yeah. There's actual research literature, Anna, around... Sorry. Looks like Claire, like Anna, just froze there for a moment.
Yep, I think you can just respond and she'll come back to life.
What I was going to say is that there's a literature around a hierarchy of commitments that we can seek. And we know that the weakest type of commitment is a verbal private commitment between two people. Up from that is a written commitment. Up from that is a public commitment. But by far in many cases, the commitments we most want to be seeking are commitments in public and durable. And the reason for that is commitments that are public and durable are visible to other people in the community. And that enhances the likelihood that the person themselves are likely to follow through with the behavior change that they said they would do. But commitments are public and durable also then bring about social diffusion often and social norms. So you can sort of get these three advantages that go along with that particular type of commitment. So yeah, there is this hierarchy, but again, often we want to be thinking not about written commitments or checkboxes. We want to be thinking up the ladder from that. and be utilizing commitments that has visibility in the larger community, because it's going to most effectively drive the behavioral choice of the person as well as behavioral choices of other people in the community.
So a question that I have about all that is that everything that I hear from both of you speaks to this very personal approach, which my own inclination is I agree with it strongly, that matches my observation of humans and millions of years of evolution to make us what we are. But in the last 100 years or so, these technological things have crept onto the scene that change how we communicate with each other. And I just wondered if I could push you both a little bit to talk about how we might, is that technology interfering with an essential human activity that makes these commitments public and durable, or can it augment this kind of campaign? Is there a role for these, for social media or other forms of technology and communication that make these campaigns more effective?
Right. I think the question, the way that I would phrase that, Claire, is to suggest how specifically can we be utilizing technology to address barriers and motivations more effectively, if we can at all. And I think it's often helpful to break that into websites versus thinking about apps, etc., that people might have on a smartphone. If you think about websites, they're really quite limited in their ability to be able to address barriers and benefits. And if you think about the long list of things that we might encourage people to do that are involved or related to energy efficiency, the reality is the vast majority of the actions we might want someone to be involved in can't be well addressed at all via a website. So I think the question we want to be asking ourselves is, of the most important actions that Anna and others would be working on related to promoting residential energy efficiency, which subset of those can we do a good job of addressing the barriers and motivations to via website? And it's going to be a very, very short list. If we think about apps instead, we want to be asking the same question. Which apps can we utilize that might do a good job of addressing the barriers and benefits to particular behavioral changes? For example, there's an app that I often speak about when I deliver workshops. It's called Biximo, if anyone wants to take a look at it. And Biximo addresses the barriers very effectively for bike sharing programs. If you're in a large city that has a bike sharing program, like, for example, Toronto or London, England, the critical question you've got, first of all, if you don't know the city very well, is where can I find a bike station that I can get a bike from? And once you've got that bike, you need to know where you can return it to. And what Biximo does very simply is it shows you where's the closest station relative to where you are. And then once you've got the bike, it lets you know where's the station you could return the bike to that has an open spot. There's no other way that I can imagine dealing with that other than through an app that's mobile that provided you with real-time information that would allow you to know where do I get it from and where can I return it to. That's really, I think, the fundamental question we need to be asking, Claire, is what are the barriers to particular behavioral changes and what are the motivations, and how, if at all, can social media, apps, websites address those? And I think we've been thinking about, we need to make sure that our programs make use of social media, that make use of websites, but I don't think that's the right question. I think we should be asking instead, how do they address barriers? How do they address benefits? And if not, then why are we utilizing them? It's not that they don't have a role, but I think we're often overutilizing them. They're not often well positioned to address barriers and benefits well for us.
Mm-hmm. So if the barrier is for example, that you don't know until after the end of the month how much you've spent on energy, an app that's giving you real-time information could actually help you to stay on budget and pay attention and reduce that barrier.
If people are accessing it.
Right. But if it's not well targeted to address a real barrier, then it's not going to work.
But it could be a text message that we're sending out to people that's letting them know that, okay, this is a time in which power is increasing in cost. You need to be thinking about washing your dishes at another time, etc. I think there are some useful ways that we can use new technologies. But again, we always want to be asking the question, for what purpose? And how is that doing it better and less expensively than something else we might be doing?
And I think, again, I think it has its place, but it shouldn't be overstated. And what Doug's talking about, is the difference between some of this push technology versus pull. If we ran an efficiency program and that had a huge marketing campaign, and had 300,000 people went to a website, and then where they were supposed to be able to get connected with contractors and be able to move forward with all the rebates and everything, and they didn't move forward. Having that personal connection, and I mean, nobody moved forward. They got stuck at the website, and those are the people who are interested enough to go to it. Mm-hmm. I think by and large, we're not, again, efficiency for many people here in Chicago is not the top priority. So how are they going to go to a website? And when they have more questions because they're not as well informed, if they do go to that website, they can dig around and look for those. The questions are going to be different for each person. That person-to-person contact really plays a role. I do think there's a role for that push technology, but it shouldn't, supersede that the person-to-person. When we come into a room and we're talking to you person-to-person, when we're actually having the conversation and we're not doing it in a salesy way, when we come into a presentation with a community group, or we're in someone's home. Well, I always joke you can't really present with a PowerPoint over the pictures of the family, or someone has art on the wall or whatever else. You can't project onto that. That doesn't work. So we go for like the most low tech, because when you're in the church basement, you have to be prepared for everything. And on top of that, you want to be a part of the room and a part of the conversation. You want people to see you as them, and then they will adopt, your behavior, and they'll include you in their decisions. That person-to-person conversation, it's shocking, actually. I actually think, to a certain extent, technology has helped us, because people are so not used to having those real conversations and not used to having presentations that aren't in a dark room staring up at a screen with someone who's not really able to connect with them. They're so not used to that when you do come to them with an actual conversation and a real connection, the reaction is so much different and so much more engaged than we've seen in the past.
So yeah, that makes sense, actually, and I think it's Doug, your point is very.
So Doug, I think as Claire's frozen there, one thing I wanted to kind of maybe ask is when you're thinking about some of these public commitments that you're talking about on curbside, if you are in a city without street pickup, right? And a lot of I don't know where you live,
barriers and figuring out the best way to solve them.
Claire, I think we're having some technical difficulties. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I would say, Claire, for the last couple of minutes, we weren't able to hear you. Anna, why don't you and I can continue the conversation while Claire is getting back online. So sort of the question you were asking?
So in cities where in Chicago, for example, in many of our cities in the States, we don't have, in the suburbs, a lot of them have curbside pickup. Right. But in our cities, we don't. And, making that public declaration, if people don't want to put a yard sign in their lawn, how would you tackle that? How have you tackled that in the past so that it is visible? Yeah,
it's a great question. I think what we want to be thinking about is what organizations are those people involved in? So are they Rotary groups, church groups? Where are the places that people congregate, community centers that we might be utilizing as places in which we can group the commitments together? And I think what's really useful about that is that then it adopts often very quickly social norms. People are seeing that a large number of people are interested in particular behavioral change. And if we're talking about multifamily dwellings, I've worked on programs in which the commitments have gone directly onto people's mailboxes. And so the mailboxes tend to all be grouped together, and so the people are seeing, oh, lots of people in my particular organization believe that, or my particular building believe that it's important to be involved in this action. And so we're utilizing, the proximity of things like mailboxes to be able to quickly develop social norms and foster social diffusion around those kinds of conversations. In many ways, at least in multifamily buildings and in office spaces, our ability to create social diffusion, social norms, I think is sometimes easier because we've got people physically close together, and we've often got interesting opportunities like mailboxes as ways to showcase actions that people are involved in.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense.
Looks like Claire's back.
Sorry, guys. Didn't mean to drop out just then. Hope you had some questions for each other in my absence.
We did.
We did.
And I came back on just to say that we have now reached the end of our time for this morning. But I want to thank you both very much, Doug Mackenzie-Moore and Anna Markowski, for joining us. And thanks to those who tuned in, submitted questions, or will tune in later on the YouTube channel. Once again, I'm Claire Butterfield, the Program Director at ISEIF, and I invite you to join our next conversation on June 17th. Don't forget to check our website and follow us on Twitter so you can see the descriptions and get updated information and links to join us. That's all for now. Thank you both so much.
Take care, Claire. Bye now.
Bye-bye. Thank you.